I'm live. I'm back from vacation in Florida this past weekend, but I was watching everything closely from the friendly confines of Beach Condo in Florida. And make sure to hit that like button as you come in, leave a comment as you come in, hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed. Most people watch this in the archives, so leave a comment below in the archives, and also hit that like and subscribe button in the if you're watching in the archives. And as always, leave that comment and make sure to hit those alerts too, because you know how YouTube is. You got to see the alerts. And props to everybody watching this on Twitter as well, closing in on 1,000 followers on Twitter. So appreciate the support there. And check out calixboxing.com. The website is live. It's up to date. It's up and running. A couple new posts there this morning. So check out my guy Chicano Prophet in the building out Chile. Gonna have to call in and talk to y'all this week, man, when y'all are live. But let's get into, I want to talk Haney Kambosos. I want to talk the pound for pound discussion. I want to talk ESPN because I was very frustrated with what I was watching on ESPN on Saturday night. Also, we're going to get into Inoue versus Donaire tomorrow morning in the betting odds. So we're going to touch on all that today. Let's start with ESPN. It's a good place to start. My frustration with ESPN is building, it's growing. We've seen this with all of their fights. There's just no flow to their telecasts. It's choppy, there's no flow, it's too many talking heads, not enough action, not enough fights. And my frustration built to a crescendo on Saturday night as I'm watching this, and I'm expecting to see a great telecast for a great fight. Undisputed matchup for all the marbles at 135. It's historic. We don't have too many undisputed champions. We don't have too many undisputed fights in the four-belt era. So you wanted everyone to be on their best behavior. You wanted production value to be high. You wanted the talking heads to be on point. And none of that was the case on Saturday night. We saw a fight. Actually, as soon as we come on, we see talking heads, go to commercial. Talking heads, we get to the fight. After the fight, we get more talking heads. We get a lot of locker room footage, more talking heads. Mark Kriegel, a Mark Kriegel segment, commercials, another Mark Kriegel segment, commercials. Oh, by the way, a fight. We get a fight. Then after the fight, we get more talking heads, more commercials, more locker room footage, more Mark Kriegel segments. I'm seeing more Mark Kriegel than actual fighters. The people calling the fight, the people who are talking about fighters shouldn't be bigger than the actual fighters. The people calling the fight shouldn't be bigger and more noticeable than the contenders, the competitors actually in the ring, in the fight. And that's what we get time and time again with ESPN, and just no flow to their cards. When there's a knockout early in the fight, you say, okay, we're going to get an extra fight. Maybe they should have something on deck just in case something happens. Get to the next fight. I don't mind a Mark Kriegel segment as long as there's flow to it. As long as there's a flow to it. There's no flow to their shows. There's no flow. It left me like missing HBO boxing. And I got frustrated on the tail end of HBO Boxing's run because Lampley was getting frustrating to watch, and Roy Jones was Roy Jones. I'm a big Roy Jones fan, but not so much as a commentator. Larry Merchant seemed to be showing his age, but at the same time, they knew how to cover a big fight. They knew, they had it down to a science. They knew how to get the flow of the show. They knew you have a fight, show the post-fight interview. All right. Then we line up the next fight, show a quick segment, and then we get to the ring walk for the next fight. We don't do commercials. And here's another thing with the commercials, because this is becoming frustrating. And I talked about it after the Zone pay-per-view. And the Zone is going to charge us $60 to watch Canelo versus Bivol. Okay, fine. Let's move on from that. But if you're charging me $60 for the pay-per-view, don't give me 6 rounds of commercials instead of seeing in between round footage of the trainer talking to the fighter, because that's a big part. That's a part of a big fight. And it takes away from a big fight when instead of us seeing the trainer cut man fighter dynamic in the corner, we have to watch a Heineken advertisement or whatever it may be. Instead of us seeing the trainer fighter dynamic, how they're handling what happened in the previous round, what's their adjustment going to be going into the next round? We don't get any of that. On top of that, when it came to ESPN, they were actually cutting away from a round with 5 seconds left in the round and then coming back next round 7 seconds into the next round. No, man, that's unacceptable. It's not acceptable. And even in the final 6 rounds, we have to see an ad on half of the screen and then on the other half, the trainer fighter dynamic. It was just frustrating to watch ESPN on Saturday night because it didn't give me the vibe of a big fight, even though it was a big fight. You got 40,000+ people in Australia watching this fight live. You've got an undisputed scrap. And instead, this thing seemed to be low budget to me. It just reeked of low budget promotion when it came to ESPN. It was frustrating to watch. Haney and his jab and hold style sucks ass. I'm going to get to that in a minute because I got a lot to say as far as the fight goes. I agree. I've complained to the zone about the commercial in between rounds too. Thought I was the only one. Corner work is such a great aspect of watching a fight. We shouldn't let that take away when we're watching a pay-per-view price. And even in this, man, even in Undisputed, there's got to be a better way to get that budget, to get that advertisement money. Because I know they need it. I know they need it to put on big fights. And look, I don't want to complain just to complain because ESPN's giving us high value as far as matchups, right? I enjoy the fact that they're giving us great matchups. But Beterbiev versus Joe Smith Jr. in a couple weeks, they've done a great job. Top Rank's done a great job of providing us value, but the production level has to match that. It has to match that. ESPN or Top Rank, I don't know which one it is. I don't know whose fault this is because when I watch a UFC event on ESPN, it's not the same case. As soon as that fight ends, post-fight interview, they're racking the next fight. They go to a quick commercial. They set up the next fight in a couple minutes, the talking heads, and they're straight to the ring entrances. So that tells me that it's likely a Top Rank issue, but it's too much talking, not enough action. Too much talking, not enough action. We shouldn't be seeing more of Mark Kriegel than we see of the actual fighters. This was a 3+ hour event. And we saw more talking than we actually saw fights in this event. And that's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. Regarding the zone, if you take a shot every time Sergio Mara says check hook, you'll be done. I don't like the zone's commentators, to be honest. Do you want a free fighter pay-per-view? They have to pay the bills in advertising. And that's what I'm saying. When I'm watching a UFC fight, on ESPN, it's not the same. It's not the same. You can't tell me that they can't pull that off. You can't tell me they can't pull that off. UFC is not cutting away. UFC, and let's get past the commercials, okay? Let's get past the commercials. Maybe commercials are a necessary evil if we're doing a fight that's not on pay-per-view, although HBO and Showtime can pull it off, non-pay-per-view, without commercials. But let's say ESPN has to do that. That doesn't address the issues that I have with too much Mark Kriegel, too many stories of the fighters instead of actual fights. I don't need to see Mark Kriegel wax poetic about every fighter constantly. I don't need to see Tessitore, Bradley, Mark Kriegel give a 15-minute segment on the current landscape of boxing and then cut away to a commercial and then do it all over again with an actual fight. I mean, they're going multiple segments without a fight. Why don't Tessitore, Bradley, and Kriegel get a podcast if they want to do that? I don't need to see them take away from the actual fights. Show me fights. I don't care what it is. Just show me fights. I don't care if it's a 4-rounder, 6-rounder. at least I'm seeing some action. Okay, so that's, I just needed to rant a little bit when it comes to ESPN boxing. And yes, we pay a monthly subscription fee. But as far as Haney versus Kambosos and how this fight played out, coming in, I didn't have a good feel of how this fight was going to play out. Kambosos has a high motor. Haney has a great jab. Haney has shown in the past that he can be a little chinny, but Kambosos has a low KO percentage. So I don't know if he was going to be the guy to test that. Obviously, he wasn't. But you can see this playing out multiple different ways. There were the questions about without Davidson in the corner, would that make a difference? Going into hostile territory, would that make a difference? And it just didn't with Haney. It just didn't with Haney. Haney, from the moment this fight started, and you saw Kambosos never got in his head in the pre-fight buildup. The rat talk, the informant talk, it just didn't nail. It didn't land when it came to Haney. Haney comes in, establishes the jab. Haney landed as many jabs as he landed power shots in this fight. And Kambosos said that's all he did was throw the jab. I don't know, but it was enough to win the fight. That's all he needed to do. Jab, jab, jab. I see people out there saying that Haney is boring. Haney should provide more entertainment value. I think that has more to do with Kambosos than it does Haney. Haney's out there to win a fight. So if jabbing and holding is going to win Haney the fight clearly, which I had Haney winning 118, 110. I thought he dominated the fight. I didn't think the fight was close. Kambosos never looked to be in this fight. Haney's out there to win a fight. And he did. And he won all the belts. Kambosos didn't bring to the table what he said he was going to bring to the table. So if we're going to blame somebody for not showing up, if we're going to blame somebody for not providing entertainment value, if we're going to blame somebody for, instead of us getting a great fight, we got a great performance, we got to blame Kambosos, not Haney. Haney went out there and did what Haney does. He outboxed him. Kambosos was supposed to be a high motor guy, was supposed to bring activity, was supposed to find angles, and was supposed to land, at least throw combination punches. He didn't do that. Instead, Kambosos posed right in front of Haney, waited for Haney to throw two shots, and he was going to counter the second shot. Haney picked that up. Haney jabbed and jabbed and jabbed, barely threw right hands behind it, but he was not going to open up when he's standing in front of a guy who is shorter, not a great counter puncher, if we're being honest. And once he gets on the inside, Haney's just going to grab him. Haney was not going to open up against this guy. He saw the mistake Teofimo Lopez made when it came to Kambosos. What did Teofimo do that screwed him up? Teofimo opened up, got wild, tried to get a first round knockout, got caught with something early in the fight, and he never fully recovered from it. Teofimo was wild. Teofimo was going for knockouts. Teofimo, if he would have reined it in a little bit, he would beat Kambosos, but he didn't. And Kambosos against Haney did not have the same openings he had against Teofimo. Haney, to his credit, he saw that. He said, I'm going to fight a smart, calculated fight. I'm going to throw the jab. This guy gets on the inside. I'm going to thwart that just by holding. Rinse and repeat. And that's what he did. And he clearly won the fight. Wasn't impressed with Haney. Lomachenko destroys him, in my opinion. And that's a fair comment to say that Lomachenko would give Haney issues that other fighters would not. Here's the thing when it comes to the lightweight division. Here's the thing with the lightweight division. These guys that they built up as the Four Kings are not these Four Kings. I don't know if there's a generational talent in the lightweight division. Not all undisputed runs are the same. It's a great achievement to become undisputed king. It's a great achievement to go into hostile territory and become undisputed king. But Haney's undisputed run is not the same as some of these other guys undisputed run in the 4-belt era. So when they built these guys up to be the 4 kings in the lightweight division, these young 4 kings, I don't think there's a generational talent amongst them. I think if you set up a round robin in the lightweight division, take 6 top fighters, and set up a round robin like we had with the Super 6 in the 168-pound division, I think they all take L's to each other. And that's good, right? Like it sets up an entertaining division. I don't mind losses. I don't mind fighters who lose. I actually like vulnerable fighters. But if we're building these guys up to be this, if we're building these guys up to be generational talents, then don't sign me up for that. I'm not going to co-sign that because I don't see a generational talent amongst them yet. Maybe Haney will be able to prove us wrong with that over time, but I see flaws, evident flaws with all these fighters. Tank Davis simply doesn't throw much, too economical, doesn't fight top competition. Once Haney's jab is neutralized by another fighter and a fighter who can throw combination punches and test Haney's chin, what happens then? Same thing can be said about Lomachenko when he fought a big puncher in Teofimo Lopez. He showed his flaws then. Ryan Garcia not stepping up. We don't know what to make of him. So all of these fighters have flaws. Kambosos just showed his flaws. You're not going to stand in front of a taller fighter who can use the jab. Just stand and wait to counter him as the shorter fighter. Kambosos threw under 100 total punches less. He threw 100 total punches less than Haney. You're not going to win a fight that way, man. You're not going to win a fight that way. You had to set up your power punch with combination punches. You had to throw even if you look wild. You have to set up angles, get on your toes, bounce in and out. He did none of that. He just posed right in front of Haney. That's not going to win you the fight. So I see weaknesses and flaws in all of these guys. That being said, it still is impressive what Haney did. Going to hostile territory, signing essentially a 4-fight deal with Top Rank in order to get this fight. So even if he fights Kambosos next, he'll still likely have to fight a guy like Lomachenko, possibly a Shakur Stevenson if he moves up to 135. Bob Arum's going to set Haney up with these fights, likely, knowing that there's a chance that Haney could bounce when he becomes a promotional free agent. He wouldn't mind giving Haney tougher fights. So that's impressive. And in my view, becoming undisputed gets you on the pound-for-pound list. I have a top 12 pound-for-pound list. I don't want to have a top 10 because everybody has a top 10. I don't want to have a top 11 because my guy Hailstorm did the top 11 thing, so I have a top 12. And Haney entered that at number 10 with this victory. And I'll unveil my top 12 tomorrow on the website, calixboxing.com. after the Inoue fight, because I want to see where Inoue lands on that. And more on that in a minute when we start talking about Inoue versus Donaire too, because it has pound-for-pound implications. The reason it has real pound-for-pound implications is because Inoue is the first guy who's going to get a shot at making a pound-for-pound king statement since the Canelo loss. Because in my opinion, Canelo was so much more active than his peers at the top of the pound for pound list that I don't see anybody who took that you could say is universally recognized as number one since the Canelo loss. Inoue is going to have his first shot, the first shot at making a claim for pound kingdom since the Canelo loss. Haney didn't do himself any favors by using that style. He just cut half his viewing audience. I think when it comes to Haney, he saw an easy pathway to victory. And why not take that? I don't think Haney is capable of knocking guys cold. He doesn't have that punching power. So why open up and give Kambosos opportunities that why give him opportunities to win the fight when you're coasting to victory if you don't have the capability to knock guys out flat? He saw the mistakes Teofimo made, and he said, you know what, I'm just going to take the easy route and box this guy. I don't like the clinching. I don't like the tactical clinching on the inside. I like to see inside fighting, and I'd like to see a referee who would enforce that. and say, no, 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 no. Here's your warning. Here's a hard warning. And next time we take a point. I'd love to see that. But we went a decade of the Klitschko reign where Klitschko would get in there with referees who would not give him any hard warnings for clinching. It's just where we are with boxing. American boxing fan in the building. Kambosos had Tio's number that night. Right place, right time. He's average. That's it. And I see a lot of people saying that Kambosos is average. I'd say he's a good fighter. I don't think he's a great fighter. I think he showed his limitations against Haney. And I think that if we put him in there with any top lightweight, you could say, yeah, I could see that guy beating him, but you got to fight the fights. The thing that I got to give Kambosos credit for fighting the fights. I got to give Teofimo the credit for going and fighting Lomachenko in the middle of a shutdown when these top fighters were not mixing it up with each other. Everybody else was sitting at home, and Lomachenko and Teofimo fought each other in an empty ballroom for lightweight supremacy. I give guys credit for mixing it up instead of guys like Tank and Ryan who are sitting on the shelf fighting average opposition. I at least give him credit for that. Kambosos could have went back to Australia, fought average opposition in front of 40,000 fans no matter who he fought. Instead, he fought for undisputed against Haney. He wanted to fight he wanted to fight Lomachenko first, so I got to give him credit. You got to fight the fights. So, yes, it's easy to say, oh, I see Tank and I see Ryan beating Kambosos if they were to fight. But one guy's mixing it up, Kambosos, the other guys aren't. So I give Kambosos credit for that. And we'll see what happens if there's a rematch, if Kambosos can make any adjustments. I just don't see that happening. I don't need to see a rematch. To me, head-to-head, Haney showed that he is clearly the better fighter. I don't know if Kambosos can make those adjustments that we know he needs to make by being more active. Can he get inside that jab? Will we have a referee who gives hard warnings for clinching? I don't know, but I'd rather see Haney move on to fights like Lomachenko if Lomachenko will be available than a rematch of a fight that we really don't need to see. And this is my frustration with rematch clauses. You live by the rematch clause, you die by the rematch clause. I know a lot of people who they demand their favorite fighters go into negotiations and demand rematch clauses. But when that happens, we get Usyk boxing circles around Anthony Joshua, and instead of going straight to undisputed, we got to watch Usyk versus Joshua 2, when I'd rather see Usyk versus Fury. This is what rematch clauses do. Instead of seeing Fury versus Wilder 3, instead of seeing Fury versus Joshua, we got to see Fury versus Wilder 3. Rematch clauses can upset the apple cart. And a lot of people like rematch clauses when it involves their favorite fighter, but as a boxing fan who just wants to see the best fights, we're forced to see Haney versus Kambosos 2, which just wasn't a good fight. It was a bit of a letdown on Saturday night, if I'm being honest, because we had Haney clearly better than Kambosos, and we have Fulton clearly better than Roman. And I was expecting two entertaining fights, close fights, and that's not what we got. Instead, we got great performances from Haney and Fulton. And if you want to blame the night being boring on somebody, blame Kambosos, blame Roman. Don't blame Haney, don't blame Fulton, because they did what they were supposed to do. They showed up. They fought the way they had to fight in order to win, and they won the fight in the process. And they both made claims for top 10, or in my case, top 12 pound for pound. So credit to them. But when we're talking about Haney versus Kambosos, I was let down by the fight, but I'm blaming Kambosos for that, not Haney. Because if Kambosos is as good of a fighter as he was built up to be, and he should have been built up as a good fighter because he beat Teofimo Lopez in the fashion he did, but he's a high motor guy. He's capable. He's in great shape. He's capable of fighting a high output fight. And he didn't. Haney's clinching him too much on the inside. Guess what? If the referee is not giving hard warnings, do something about it. Rough him up a little bit on the inside. Make the referee get involved. Throw some elbows, throw some low blows. Get this guy off of you. And on top of that, bounce in and out. Get on your toes. Use some angles. Do something to get your output up. And Kambosos was never able to do that. And that's simply because Haney's the better fighter. But I'm blaming Kambosos for not making a more entertaining fight, not Haney. Because coming in, we knew if it was going to be an entertaining fight, it was going to be because of Kambosos. Haney has never been accused of being an exciting fighter. He's a guy who wants to box. He's a guy who wants to stay on the back foot, throw the jab. And if you're not forcing the fight like Jojo Diaz was able to do, Linares in spots, then it's going to turn into a boring boxing match. And that's what Haney did. And the reason it was a boring boxing match because he was that much better than Kambosos, who I had winning. I had Haney winning 118, 110. I gave Kambosos 2 rounds. But Jojo Diaz was able to make it a fight against Haney. And that's because Jojo Diaz was able to get on the inside of the jab. Jojo Diaz just doesn't have power, and that's why he couldn't win the fight. But he was able to get on the inside of that jab. Kambosos was not. So if we want to blame somebody for this being a boring fight, blame Kambosos, not Haney. Tank Davis, a lightweight division version of Deontay Wilder. Devin Haney is chinny. Took 4 rounds to recover from Linares' straight right hand. And that's what I'm saying. All of these guys at 135, I'm not sure there's a generational talent amongst them. I think they all have flaws. And I'm not taking away from Haney's undisputed achievement because it's a great achievement. And by the way, another criticism I have of ESPN is they need to get it together as far as how many undisputed champions there are, because they were trying to claim that Haney would be the 10th or 11th undisputed champion. That's just not the case. It's just not the case. That's propaganda. Kambosos was not the undisputed champ coming into this fight. And Teofimo was not the undisputed champ going into the Kambosos fight. It's just not facts. It's just not facts. ESPN needs to get it together on many levels. Shakur beats him if he moves up. An aggressive Williams Zepeda would overwhelm Haney too. And I'm of the opinion that if we're looking at a special talent in that realm of those weight classes, Shakur Stevenson is that. He's that guy. I believe if Shakur Stevenson will move up to 130 from 130 to 135, which is what Bob Arum wants him to do, and instead Shakur Stevenson wants to become undisputed at 130, and I don't think he's going to get that opportunity. I don't think the Cordina fight's going to happen. I think there's going to be issues with DAZN and Top Rank. Cordina has a mandatory, I think, against Rakhimov. So that fight's not going to happen. The other undisputed fight, other unification fight at 130, likely not going to happen either. But if he were to move up to 135, I would favor Shakur against everybody at 135 right now. I think I would favor him against Devin Haney. I would slightly favor him over against Lomachenko. I would favor him healthy against guys like Kambosos, Tank, Ryan. I think Shakur Stevenson would be the guy at 135 as soon as he entered that division. I was just speaking about right now, I don't see a generational talent at 135, but I see one at 130. His name's Shakur Stevenson. So I think if Shakur Stevenson moves up to 135, I think that landscape would fit him quite nicely. And there are fights up there for him at 135, being that he's with Top Rank. So when he says he wants to stick around at 130 to get undisputed, I'm not so sure he shouldn't just move over to 135 now if Bob wants to make those fights and if Bob's willing to make those fights. If Tank fights Haney, no way Haney makes it 12 rounds unless he runs and holds the whole fight. I'm not so sure about that either because I think Tank would have some issues being the economical fighter he is and being a shorter fighter and being a naturally small fighter. You got to remember, Haney looked big on Saturday night. Haney's a big lightweight and Tank is a small lightweight. Tank will give up a lot as far as reach, and Tank does not have a high motor. Tank throws 37 punches per round. So the interesting thing about that is he would face a lot of the same issues that Kambosos had, although he would land harder shots than Kambosos, obviously. And he would set up his punches better. But the problem Kambosos had is he was outpunched. And he needed to be throwing combination punches to set up his fight, set up his shots. And he didn't. Tank would be the same way. Tank is not going to throw combination shots in order to land that big shot on Shakur, on Devin Haney. He'd be loading up on one shot, much like Kambosos was trying to do, and counter. It would be difficult for Tank to get through that jab. That's one of the best jabs in boxing. I would put it up there with Bivol and Golovkin's. Haney's jab is right there with those guys. He's got the best up jab in the sport. Sometimes that's all you need against certain fighters. That's all he needed against Kambosos. He landed as many jabs as he landed power shots against Kambosos. That's all he needed. All he needed to dominate that fight. And that's the interesting thing about, say, a matchup between Haney and Tank is we could say, oh, Tank would give Haney problems because once he tapped that chin, the fight's over. But it's going to be difficult for him to throw shots up against a bigger, naturally more physical fighter, get through that jab. Look, Haney is not Isaac Cruz. Haney's not Matteo Barrios. Haney is not Rolly Romero. Haney's got more talent than those guys, more natural talent. He's just as big, if not bigger. He's going to be landing that jab at will against an economical fighter like Tank Davis. So it's an interesting matchup. But once again, if you do a round robin between these guys, I think all of them end up with an L. I don't think there's a dominant fighter at 135 right now. Still impressive what Haney was able to do in this fight, even though Kambosos is a good fighter. It's still impressive that he was willing to, at the end of the day, sign a 4-fight deal with Top Rank, go over to Australia, take the belts from him, and then he's got to go back over there, defend those belts. And then he's likely going to have to fight tough fights against other top-ranked fighters in and around the division, being that he may be expendable to Bob Arum, knowing that Haney's going to be a promotional free agent after 2023. Impressive. Best performance of Devin's career. I hate rematch clauses, as do I. Haney defense is overrated too. Whenever he gets hit, he overreacts, and whenever he feels pressure, he holds. He's pretty fragile when it comes to standing in the pocket, possibly, and that's those flaws we were talking about. Shout out JC in the building. Also the best clinching. There was a lot of clinching. But that's what I'm saying. Like, good, really good to great fighters don't let the clinching. Just jabbing and clinching is not going to deter those guys. But it was enough to get him past Kambosos, which makes me believe that Kambosos isn't a really good to great fighter. Did you see Haney and Shakur's sparring match? Devin started to bully Shakur late into that sparring match. It was way more than a sparring match as well. Haney, the American Dream, is legit, and he's number 10 on my pound-for-pound list after Saturday night. And he is the undisputed champion. So props to him. Great performance. Great performance. As far as Inoue versus Donaire 2, coming up tomorrow morning, I believe 6 a.m. my time, maybe 7 a.m. Love this matchup. Love it for many reasons. One, Inoue is going to be the first guy since Canelo lost to try to stake his claim for pound-for-pound supremacy. In my opinion, from where I'm sitting, Canelo was so much more active than his top pound-for-pound peers that he was lapping these guys. So when he lost, there's no precedent for a guy coming off of a loss to be pound-for-pound king that I know of. So there's a vacuum there for somebody to fill, and guys like Crawford, Spence, Usyk, Inoue just simply haven't been active enough, close to active enough to where Canelo was to fill that vacuum yet. So right now, I don't think there's a guy that I can point to who is universally seen as the pound-for-pound king right now. The top of the pound-for-pound rankings and the bottom are both volatile right now, in my opinion, the whole rankings. What's been interesting about the past 2 years before Canelo's loss is Canelo saw the vacuum and he went and took it. He just became active, great achievement, undisputed at 168. So he laid his claim, he planted his flag at the top of the pound-for-pound rankings. So we were at least able to say that even though the pound-for-pound rankings are volatile right now for many reasons, number one is not volatile. We have our clear number one pound-for-pound guy in Canelo. Canelo loses to Bivol. Now we don't have that. Now we have this whole thing in flux. Now we have a top 10 pound-for-pound rankings where it's volatile from top to bottom. If you look at pound for pound rankings on Twitter, people's pound for pound rankings are all over the place. And I think that's a testament to the fact that it's so volatile right now. It's tough to say who is number one, clearly. With all the guys making claims in the top 10, we saw two more guys this past weekend, Fulton and Devin Haney, making a claim to enter top 10 pound for pound rankings. It's hard for guys to stay on pound for pound rankings at the bottom because you have so many guys making claims. I wrote down a list of 20 guys who I can make a claim for top 10 pound for pound. And once again, I'll be releasing mine on calixboxing.com tomorrow, my top 12 pound for pound. But it's volatile from top to bottom. It's volatile. Inoue stops Donaire. I agree. And me and my guy Nando have been going back and forth on this. He thinks Nando is going to pull off an upset. I don't agree. If you look at the betting odds, Inoue is a minus 550 favorite. Donaire is plus 400. So the same odds basically as what we saw between Fulton and Roman. If you look further into the betting odds, Inoue by KO is the most likely scenario, minus 200. So Vegas is saying it's likely that Inoue knocks out Donaire. The second most likely is Inoue by decision plus 300. Then Donaire by KO plus 650. Donaire by decision plus 900. So Vegas is saying if Donaire wins this fight, it's going to be basically by landing a big shot. But they're still pricing that as a big underdog for Donaire to do that. Plus 650. The over-under for this fight, furthermore, is 7.5. 7.5 rounds. The over is priced at minus 120, the under minus 110. So even odds either way as to over under 7.5. So what Vegas is telling you is likely in the middle rounds, Inoue stops Donaire. Inoue has only, I believe, 2 wins by decision in his career. The rest are by knockout, by some sort of stoppage. If you look at the first fight, Inoue had Donaire in trouble in the middle rounds. Donaire, to his credit, he came back from that, hurt Inoue later in the fight, broke his orbital bone, gave Inoue just a tough fight, which shocked a lot of people. Furthermore, what Donaire is doing at this point in his career, pushing 40, is impressive. Just impressive. One of the most impressive things in boxing. And for people underrating it, here would be my pitch to you. Lower weight class fighters, and people have heard me say it, lower weight classes are not designed for aging fighters. They're just not. They're not designed for fighters up there in age. It's impressive what Chocolatito's doing in his mid-30s, being through war versus war against tough opposition. When you're in lower weight classes, you have to fight more legacy fights because the money just isn't there for you. If you look at what they were going to pay Gallo Estrada versus Franco for their fight, the guys had to split $120,000 between them. They're not being paid what upper class fighters are being paid. They're forced into fighting more legacy fights. They're forced into fighting more top opposition in the division. So it's tougher to sustain that throughout your career. Also, it's tougher if you're a fighter pushing 40, who's also been in tough fights, to fight against guys who naturally have a higher output, higher motor. It's tough to keep that pace. This isn't middleweight. This isn't light heavyweight where guys are averaging in the 40s punches per round. These guys are averaging 60s, 70s punches per round. So it makes what Donaire is doing that more impressive, that much more impressive. That being said, I think this is the end for Donaire. And that's with all due respect to Donaire because I have the utmost respect for him. I think he's sort of had multiple Hall of Fame careers in one, much like we say about Pacquiao. It's impressive what Donaire has done throughout his career in evolving his game. He was a one-handed fighter early in his career. That's all he needed. Over time, he became a two-handed fighter. Over time, he became a more technically sound fighter. Has power in both hands. It's impressive. Some people would say he's even a better fighter later in his career than he was early in his career when he was just relying on his talent and his explosiveness. But Inoue is Inoue. This guy is called the monster for a reason. 2021, he was active. He fought twice. And maybe his opposition was undervalued a little bit. He beat Maloney at the end of 2020, and after this past weekend, that win ages better. But I think Inoue is looking for that big win that's going to get him back in the discussion for the pound-for-pound king. And getting Donaire's name on his resume again and ending this thing, ending this little rivalry he has with Donaire by knockout, by stoppage, gets him back hot when it comes to the American boxing public. It gets him back hot. And this is a huge fight in Japan, super fight. And I'm well aware that if he wins this fight, you're going to have some people saying, oh, but Donaire's old. You're going to have that stuff. But let's not revise history after this fight. Him beating Donaire, a guy who just beat Obali for a legit title at 118, then following that up with another victory and working his way into a unification fight. If Inoue beats Donaire by stoppage here, he then has 3 belts at 118. He then has 2 wins against Donaire, and he adds that to everything else he has on his resume and his legacy in 20 fights. The beautiful thing about Inoue is he gives you everything packed into a 118-pound fighter. People's criticism with the lower weight classes who don't watch the lower weight classes are, oh, I don't want to watch horse jockeys fight. These guys don't have one-punch power. I don't get what I'm watching with the same with upper weight class fighters. Inoue gives you all of that. Inoue gives you a guy who can give you the motor of a lower weight class fighter, punch placement. He can give you one punch knockout power. He can do it with combinations. Lateral movement. He's got it all. He's got it all. If you look at the top of the pound for pound rankings, there are 2 things that the guys at the top all have. Let's take Inoue, let's take Canelo, let's take Usyk, let's take Crawford. They all have 2 things in common. One, punch placement. These guys can set up punches against any type of style. They can set it up, and that's due to their punch placement. Canelo maybe not against Bivol, but they all can set up those punches. They know where to land those shots. They can land it on the liver. They can change levels, go upstairs and downstairs. They can set up those shots, punch placement. Number 2, they all have a killer instinct and finishing power. They can all finish. Usyk at cruiserweight can finish. Usyk has shown even at heavyweight that he's got some power to keep guys honest. Crawford, we know, can finish, has killer instinct. Canelo and Inoue can also finish. He can finish. Inoue is a talent. Inoue is going to crack that chin, says JC. I'm very confident, as am I. I'm very confident that Inoue is going to beat Donaire, but how great would it be if Donaire pulls off a shocking victory going in on 40? He says the one thing he wants to do in his career that he hasn't done yet is become undisputed. So what if Donaire lands a big shot? If you watch that first fight, the interesting thing about it, and the special thing about Inoue, is he can out-jab a taller fighter. So Inoue was great at leading with the jab. He was also good at counter-jabbing Donaire, the naturally taller fighter. And you saw Donaire realize that he couldn't keep pace with Inoue. So he was trying to load up on counters and land big shots, and he had success with that as well. So will Donaire be able to land a big shot against Inoue that's going to change the course of this fight? That's the big question. And how awesome would it be if this turned out to be like the first fight? Then Donaire is very much in this. But Vegas, as do I, say Mother Nature's undefeated, Father Time's undefeated. At some point, those legs start to give out on you. And I don't know, Inoue is just a special fighter, man. I don't know if you can go 18, 24 rounds with this guy and not get put down. This guy's KO percentage is so high. Can Donaire pull that off? Seems nowadays that anytime a fighter wins, people place them on the pound for pound list, getting annoying. The thing about the pound for pound list, though, is I wrote down about 20 guys. Now you can make a case for top 10. So if a guy in that top 20, if they're all giving us great performances or great wins, you start to have that volatile situation to where you can make a case for 20 guys being in the top 10, I believe. So right now, Fulton and Haney just made good cases. And guess what? If Donaire were to beat Inoue this weekend, definitely he's on it. I mean, he'd be high on it. So pound for pound implications here. Do you know where we can watch Inoue versus Donaire? And that is that that's ESPN, I believe, right? I think that's ESPN. And I think it starts at like 6 a.m. my time tomorrow. So it's a Tuesday fight in Japan. I think that would be Tuesday night in Japan. And it's Tuesday morning early here. But I think it's on ESPN. Inoue is going to stop Donaire. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. The Inoue fight is on ESPN Plus. There you go. Hopefully better coverage than we got between Haney, Kambosos and Haney. Great point. Only 10 feature this cab feature unless this is box rec. I agree. Inoue stops Donaire. And that seems to be the favorite coming in, is an Inoue stoppage of Donaire. I love both fighters, but Inoue stops Donaire. Inoue's past KO fights give me goosebumps. Punch placement, killer instinct, finishing power. Inoue gives you all of that. Which, if anybody asks you why you have Inoue so high on your pound for pound list, because I already have people setting this up. Oh, you can't have Inoue pound for pound. You can't have it. Why not? Why not? He's at least an active fighter. A lot of these other guys have been fighting once a year. Inoue is the only other guy I would consider an active, full-time fighter right now with Canelo in the top 5, 6. He fought twice last year. And on top of that, he gives you everything that you can get from an upper weight class fighter. And oh, by the way, if he beats Donaire, he'll have 3 belts in his division. And this would be the toughest leg of Undisputed. Because if given the opportunity, he would become undisputed in the next fight. And then if he were able to pull that off, I think he would be the mandatory if he moved up in weight to fight Stephen Fulton. And you're not a special fighter. I mean, you're not just a really good to great fighter if we're talking about you moving up a weight class to fight a guy talented as Stephen Fulton. I think at that point, you're a special fighter. Shout out my guy, Bruce Gass. Salute and support Calix Boxing 2.0. Appreciate that. But I think this is setting up for Inoue great performance. I think this is setting up for Inoue's one of his big moments in his career, one of his big victories. And I think this is setting up for him to make his claim that I'm the top fighter pound for pound in the sport. And oh, by the way, if you look at the landscape at the top of the pound for pound list, oh, by the way, Canelo likely fights 2 more times this calendar year. Oh, by the way, Usyk fights Joshua again, so he's going to have his shot at staking his claim. And oh, by the way, if Errol Spence and Terence Crawford fight later this year, which it looks like they will, there's talks of October, them fighting, the winner of that fight likely will be seen by the end of the calendar year as the pound for pound king. So people get in their feels anytime I talk pound for pound and mention, let's say, Inoue. Let's say I say Inoue tomorrow beats Donaire and I have him number 1 pound for pound. You're going to have the Usyk people who are also are tweeting me today saying, how could you not have Usyk pound for pound number 1? You're going to have the same thing with Crawford, with Spence, with all these guys. One, it's a subjective list. I can do with what I want with my list. You do with what you want with your list. It's subjective, number 1. Number 2, as I stated, and I've been consistent in this, when Canelo lost, he was so far ahead of everybody with activity that there's a vacuum there that I didn't see any of the other guys fill. So I feel all these guys are 1 performance away. Inoue gets his first shot at that. And these other guys will get their shot as well in 2022. And Canelo will get his shot at trying to reclaim the pound for pound kingdom. But right now, I don't see a universal number one. I think it's just all over the place from 1 to 10 right now. And I've been consistent on my criteria. But I also say your criteria cannot be rigid. Because if you look at BoxRec, the issue that BoxRec has is their rankings get weird. Their pound for pound rankings get weird because their rankings are so rigid. So they have guys in the top 10 who don't belong there, guys in the top 20 don't belong there. They have guys who belong in the top 10 who are outside the top 25. And it's subjective. It's a subjective list for a reason. And when you try to be too objective with it, when you try to be too rigid with your criteria, it gets to be a mess. I say that to say rules are meant to be broken. Criteria is meant to be broken. So if a fighter has built up enough equity over time and they get a great win, that's enough to put them above another fighter who would, in any other case, would be higher than that fighter according to your criteria. So I don't think you should be too rigid with your pound for pound. Inoue is as short as 2-1 for rounds 1 through 6. There's some value to find there if you dig deep enough. If Inoue destroys Donaire, he's number one pound for pound to me. And that's how I'm looking at it too. He's going to have a shot, but it's volatile. So when Usyk fights after the Inoue fight, if Usyk knocks out Joshua, or if Usyk outboxes him again, then Usyk's got a good shot at going above Inoue. If Crawford and Spence fight later this year, those guys have a great case. The winner of that fight has a great case, has the best case, in my opinion, of being pound for pound number one, given the magnitude of that win, what that would do for the winner of that fight. So it's volatile right now. And it's good that it's volatile, but it's also good to have a guy that you could point to and say, that's our pound for pound king. And right now we've got a volatile top to bottom 1 to 10 pound for pound. At the end of the day, at the end of this podcast, I'll just recap it. Devin Haney, great performance. Not a great fight. Was disappointed in Kambosos a bit, but you got to give Haney credit for keeping that jab out there and keeping Kambosos at bay and going over there and cementing history for himself, legacy, becoming undisputed is a great achievement. But at the same time, I don't know if I see a great generational talent at 135 right now. I think if they did a round robin, every fighter in that round robin, a Super 6 type of tournament at 135, I think every fighter would take an L. I don't think there's an unbeatable fighter at 135. I don't think there's an invincible fighter at 135. I don't see a 4-king scenario at 135. I think these guys all have evident flaws that can be taken advantage of from other fighters. And when styles play out, I think all of those fighters would take an L. And example of that specific would be how this lightweight supremacy is being tossed around like a hot potato. Lomachenko had it, then Teofimo had it, then Kambosos had it, now Haney has it. And I wouldn't be shocked if looking past the Kambosos fight that Haney would give that up as well. I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if Haney's reign at the top of 135 is short-lived. Wouldn't be shocked. Pound for pound, I just gave my spiel on pound for pound. And Inoue versus Donaire too. I like Inoue by middle round stoppage here. Middle round KO, middle round stoppage. It's tough to fight competitively against top fighters in the lower weight classes if you're pushing 40. It's just tough to do. Those lower weight classes are not designed for aging fighters. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it just shows you how special what Donaire is doing right now. That's not a knock on Donaire at all, me picking Inoue. It's two things. It's one, I'm very high on Inoue, have been for a while. And number two, they call him the monster for a reason. And number two, there just comes a point, man, when you get old in the ring. And 39 years old is very old for 118 pounds. It's old. I came in late, but your first subject about quality of the show, Timothy Bradley was horrendous this weekend. He said Haney's name every 2 seconds. I usually don't mind Tim, but my God, it was bad. I also thought Timothy Bradley was off on Saturday night as well, and I usually like Bradley. but I felt even he was off. The whole broadcast was just awful from top to bottom. And it was unfortunate because a fight of this magnitude deserved better production level. It deserved better talking heads, pundits, and it just missed the mark from top to bottom when it came to ESPN. It was frustrating to watch. Frustrating to watch. And I got an interview, I got a article about it on calixboxing.com, by the way. But yeah, overpraising Haney. And then he also did that weird thing when, like Lampley did when Pacquiao fought, I believe it was Cloudy. Like bam, bam, bam. Every time Pacquiao landed a shot, he was doing the same thing for Kambosos. Every time Kambosos landed a shot, oh, look at that. He was off. He was off. Tessitore was off. Kriegel was off. I'm not a big fan of Kriegel. Too much Kriegel. Inoue this time around fight with 2 eyes. Bad news for Donaire. Yeah, and give credit to Donaire, though. He's the one who took the eye away from Inoue in the first fight. So will he be able to do that again? We'll see. He's now a 2-handed fighter. But on that note, man, see y'all later on. I'll be on D-Style Boxing's channel for the roundtable tonight. So check out D-Style Boxing. I'll be back here around the same time tomorrow to talk the recap of Inoue versus Donaire 2, which happens tomorrow morning in the States. Tuesday morning in the States, ESPN+. I'm out.